The Bay of Pigs affair, again, was President Kennedy's first experience with foreign affairs. And we told you that his biggest concern when he took office was American morale towards the Soviet Union. And he wanted to take some quick, bold action to help Americans regain their self-confidence with Russia. And what was concerning to the United States is that Cuban leader Fidel Castro, who just recently passed away, had become a very strong ally with the Soviet Union. And the United States, way before the Kennedy administration, always wanted to free Cuba from Castro's control. So in the late 1950s, during the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, they had initiated a plan to deal with Castro. And the plan was an invasion of Cuba by Cuban army exiles. Those were people who were banished from their country. The CIA trained those exiles, and the plan was threefold. Their invasion was going to trigger an anti-communist attitude, which would lead to a, number two, revolt by the Cuban citizens that were tired of Castro's leadership, which would lead to the assassination of Fidel Castro. So Kennedy looked this plan over, and it would be his decision whether they would continue it or not. He studied it. He continually talked to the CIA about what exactly the American commitment would be in this invasion. And the CIA told President Kennedy they would need the following three things from him. They would need military air cover for the exiles during their invasion of Cuba. They would need the use of American troops to mop up after the invasion, to restore order. And then they would need the American government's assistance in establishing a democratic government in Cuba once the invasion was successful. So Kennedy studied this plan. He listened to the CIA. He consulted with his closest advisors, and finally gave the CIA permission to continue that plan. Well, on April 17th of 1961, a force of 1,382 Cuban exiles landed on the southern coast of Cuba, known as the Bay of Pigs. The entire operation turned out to be a disaster for the United States and the Kennedy administration for three reasons. One, the landing site that was chosen by the CIA was, want to get that, bro? Okay. The landing site chosen by the CIA was too far from the mountains, which were needed to provide protection for the exiles. The revolt by Cuban citizens against Castro never happened. And at the very last minute, President Kennedy decided not to provide the air support for the exiles. Now, Beth, tell me why Kennedy decided not to provide that air support. Why did he decide not to provide it? Anybody remember that story?
Hey, you're not Nybeth.
Will? Go ahead, Nybeth, you got it?
No, I got it.
Okay, Will, go ahead.
America didn't want to be accused of another assassination of another country's leader.
Right, and where'd that come from, Brooke? Where'd that idea come from? Who? Yeah. Bobby Kennedy said to the president, boy, this sounds good, and it sounds like it might work, but the problem I have is we're going to be involved in the assassination of another country's leader. And he did not think that was a very good idea. So Kennedy pulled out at the last minute with the air support, and it turned out to be an absolute disaster. Yes?
So as far as the revolt of trying to get people of Cuba to revolt, what's the size of Cuba? Like how many different towns were in there so the news would travel?
You know, there's a lot of towns in Cuba, but I think the idea was it would have a domino effect, that when they start seeing some success, people go, oh, this is the time to revolt, as it had done in history, world history forever. Trouble was the people were very, very afraid of Fidel Castro and figured out if they lost the revolt, what their fate would be. Well, after this invasion failed, President Kennedy was very upset with who? CIA. He didn't believe he was given all the information necessary on the invasion, and as a result, he fired CIA Director Allen Dulles. That's why we talked before about John McCone coming in after Allen Dulles, because Allen Dulles was fired by President Kennedy because he felt that the CIA did not give him the information he needed. They weren't up front with him. He was frustrated, and he fired CIA Director Allen Dulles. Fired him. So, what happened to those 1,382 Cuban army exiles that were involved in the invasion? They either were what or what? Killed or captured. The exact numbers, 203 were killed during the invasion. 203 were killed, and 1,179 were captured, which in this case, you might have been better off what? Killed, yeah. So 203 were killed, 1,179 were captured. Now, what would President Kennedy do now? Okay, he's going to address the nation on national television, and what's he going to do that might be unusual of today's politicians? He's going to tell the truth and take full responsibility for it. He's not going to blame the CIA on misinformation. He gets on national television. The young president addresses the nation. He swallows his pride, and he takes total responsibility for the invasion. Total responsibility. And during his speech, he had two quotes that I think are worth knowing. And one is, I think, a very good quote. But the first quote he said on national television, you don't really have to write it down. He said, "I am the responsible officer of the government." In other words, no matter what went on, I'm the president. I am the responsible officer of the government. I take full responsibility for this bad decision. And then he made this comment. And I think it can be made in life in a lot of different situations. He says, quote, "Victory has 100 fathers, and defeat is an orphan." You think about that. Victory has 100 fathers, and defeat is an orphan. Not being critical of the boys basketball team, but I'm making a point. You win the state championship last year and beat Douglas. You have victory. You have 100 fathers, don't you? I mean, everybody in Worland has always been a Worland Warrior fan, which half of them probably never went to a game. But that's how it is. Victory has 100 fathers. They go to the other night and have a little difficulty in the rematch, get beat pretty good. Defeat is an orphan. I bet there wasn't that many people going around saying how they were great basketball supporters of the boys team after they get beat by Douglas. I mean, that's what it is. And that's what he means. Victory has 100 fathers and defeat is an orphan. Now here's where I think you really look at the character of President Kennedy. Okay? On December 29th, 1962, on December 29th of 1962, what do you think he did to make up for the Bay of Pigs with the people that he sent over there? Okay, where are these 1,179 captured exiles? Living a pure hell. Well, what Kennedy did is he negotiated, had someone negotiate, the release of those 1,179 Cuban exiles, and he gave Cuba $62 million worth of supplies and goods in exchange for those exiles. So rather than let those exiles that were free from Cuban reign, who chose to try to start a revolt, die a miserable death in Cuban prisons, he negotiated and sent $62 million worth of supplies and goods to Cuba in exchange for those surviving exiles.
Is that a popular choice?
You know, I think at the time it was a good move on his part, and I don't think people complained. Is that what you mean? The man that he sent to negotiate with Fidel Castro was an American lawyer by the name of James B. Donovan. James B. Donovan. This has got a little bit of an ironic twist to it. James B. Donovan. And Donovan, what he was he was a lawyer, like I said. He was also a United States Navy officer at the time and a political negotiator. That's what he did for a living. So he was a member of the United States Navy, he was an officer, he was a lawyer, and he was a political negotiator. So they sent him to negotiate deals with other countries. Anybody want to guess the last deal he made? Think about the deal that we made. I'd be really impressed if you pick this up. A deal we made where we had to do an exchange with Russia. And he negotiated that one too. Francis Gary Powers, very good. He was the man that negotiated the exchange of Francis Gary Powers, the guy that was shot down over Soviet Union airspace. He negotiated that exchange for Soviet spy Rudolf Abel. Now, have you ever seen the movie Bridge of Spies? Anybody watch that? James Donovan is who Tom Hanks plays in that movie, just so you know. So if you get bored, or we want to have a movie night after Christmas, which we talked about, maybe we'll watch that. Now, the point of the Bay of Pigs, however, is Kennedy's first experience with foreign affairs was an absolute disaster. And so people again began to question what? Age and experience. Okay, so it was not a positive thing that happened early in his administration. However, his trip to Berlin and the speech he gave in Berlin is going to change people's minds a little bit. And then the Cuban Missile Crisis, which we'll talk about after Christmas vacation, will change Americans' minds forever on his ability with foreign affairs. Well, that's a good question. Hannah says, how did this incident not make him unpopular? I wouldn't say it didn't make him unpopular, but it wasn't to the state of criticism that you get today. There were people thinking, geez, maybe this guy was too young and maybe not experienced enough, especially in foreign affairs. But they weren't ready to crucify him like you might see today. Was he popular over the move? No. Was he criticized and absolutely put down every minute? No. It was a little bit of a different world. People are going to have a little more patience. Okay, that'll take us to the Berlin Wall. Berlin Wall. Okay, and we're going to tell you a little history on the Berlin Wall, and then we're going to tell you a little story, and I'm going to argue with Taylor. A little bit, not a lot. Okay. I don't know if you know the whole story behind the Berlin Wall. It's a good story. Okay, we kind of got to back up to explain this whole thing. In 1945, at the end of World War II, basically picture this in your mind, more than 55 million people have died and Europe kind of lays in ruins. This is what it looks like after World War II. Okay, we told you about Russia's Red Army taking control of the city of Berlin at a cost of about 200,000 men. Remember the march from Stalingrad? And they went to Berlin and Hitler committed suicide in his bunker and all that. Well, when the whole thing ended, Russia really wanted the capital of defeated Germany as the spoils of war. Russia wanted to have Berlin. That's what they wanted for their effort of losing 200,000 men to march from Stalingrad to get to Berlin to get, the war to end in Europe. Well, the results of the agreement that ended World War I forced the Soviet Union to share the country of Germany and the city of Berlin with the Western Allies. So we'll talk about this in a minute. Now this is not going to be an up to scale, this is Germany, so to speak, okay? So with the agreement that ended World War II, Germany was divided in half, okay? The eastern part of Germany was controlled by who? Russia. The western part by the Allies, namely the United States, but it was the Allies. Now, so West Germany was non-communist. France, Great Britain, and the United States would control the fate of West Germany. Russia would control the fate of East Germany. Well, the city of Berlin was 110 miles inside the East German zone, which made it kind of difficult because what we did is, according to these agreements after World War II, we divided the city of Berlin also. And the western part of Berlin would be non-communist, and the eastern part of Berlin would be communist. Kind of a touchy, sticky situation when the city is where? In the Eastern Bloc, right? That was a little bit controversial. Well, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin really saw West Berlin as a thorn in the flesh of the Eastern occupation of Russia. He just didn't like it. It was like a sore, just a thorn in his side all the time. And what he wanted to do, and he tried this in 1948, Stalin blocked all the roads into West Berlin from the Soviet side to force the Allies out of the city. Now picture that in your mind. In 1948, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin blocked all the roads into West Berlin from the Soviet side to force the Allies out of the city. Now, Stalin ends up his reign in Russia, and who takes over for him? Nikita Khrushchev, okay? And you know what Nikita Khrushchev called West Berlin? A malignant tumor. He called it a malignant tumor in the flesh of East Germany, okay? So, picture this in your mind. Stalin doesn't like this arrangement. He views West Berlin as a thorn in the East German or Russian side. Khrushchev refers to West Berlin as a malignant tumor in the flesh of East Germany. It's just a bad situation. So Khrushchev was kind of an on-real cuss, and whenever he wanted to cause pain to the Western Hemisphere, the United States, Great Britain, France, what he would do is he would appear to make an attempt to take control of what? West Berlin. And this is going to go on, and we got to remember this throughout the Cuban Missile Crisis, because we are bound and determined, we be in the United States, that West Berlin will never come under what? Communist control. So after taking control of the Soviet Union, new President Nikita Khrushchev looked at West Berlin basically as a malignant tumor in the flesh of East Germany. And whenever he wanted to cause pain or aggravate countries in the Western Hemisphere, especially the United States, he would appear to make an attempt to gain control of West Berlin. Now, this is kind of it's not the nicest language, but this is what he said. He really gloated of having control of East Berlin and bothering the Western Hemisphere and West Berlin. He said it was like being able to squeeze the testicles of the West whenever he felt like it. So whenever he wanted to aggravate the West, he would just try to make a move or act like he was going to make a move onto West Berlin. And he compared it to squeezing the testicles. And if you're a male, you know that isn't the best thing for you. It's aggravating, right? But that's what he compared it to. So what he did is he kind of used West Berlin as a pawn, is what he did. Now, go ahead.
I was going to say, why didn't you just cut it so it's so 50-50, but take the line?
Because Berlin was just so important of a city that they wanted to control. They didn't want Berlin to be communist, the Western Hemisphere.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, they could have just split, like, the line could have just been kind of curved, so it included West Berlin, but
the East wasn't going to stand for a line over here. Is that what you mean?
No, I just mean like the land is still 50-50,
Like,
but
50-50, well, that's not where Berlin is.
Whatever. Yeah, it's not where Berlin is. Yeah, it just isn't going to work. Now, here's the thing. When President Kennedy took office, he really felt it was important to meet with Khrushchev to try to get this testicle squeezing, for lack of a better term, to stop, because he could see it was just going to cause problems. So what Kennedy did after he took office is he made an appointment to meet with Soviet Premier Khrushchev, and they agreed to meet in Austria in June of 1961. So Kennedy is inaugurated in January of 1961, and then he makes arrangements to meet with Soviet Premier Khrushchev in Austria in June of 1961, just months after he takes over office. You need Khrushchev spelled in?
Yeah.
Okay, I was kind of trying to look at it this way. KH and a rush and Chev. KH, a rush, and a Chev. KH, a rush, and a Chev. But anyway, Kennedy feels it's important to try to talk with his rival and get this thing taken care of. Now, this meeting that happened in June of 1961 lasted 2 full days. The entire topic of discussion was Berlin. Okay, entire topic of discussion was Berlin. So in June of 61, Kennedy meets with Soviet Premier Khrushchev in Austria. The meeting lasts 2 days, with the entire topic of discussion being the situation in Berlin. Well, Khrushchev wasn't very hospitable, I guess would be the way to put it. He saw this young president as inexperienced. So in that 2 days, really nothing was settled between the two leaders. And after the meeting, both nations strengthened their military strength.
Did we already learn about the airdrops into Berlin, or is that to come still?
It's still coming. Okay? So nothing was settled between the two leaders, and after the meeting, both nations increased their military strength. Now I'm going to give you some statistics here. It's kind of interesting. Between 1949 and 1960, that would be from the time World War II ended until Kennedy was elected, it was estimated that approximately 3 million people from East Germany fled to West Berlin. Between 1949 and 1960, they estimate that about 3 million East Germans fled to West Berlin because they didn't want to be part of what? Communism. Well, where it became an issue was in July of 1961. This was about a month after the meeting between Kennedy and Khrushchev. This infiltration of East Germans into West Germany, or West Berlin, continued at a rate of about 1,000 a day. So what's happening to the population of East Germany? It's dwindling. And that's going to be a problem we'll talk about. So between 1940 and 1960, they estimated that about 3 million people had moved basically from East Germany to West Germany in the city of Berlin. That's where they were moving. And then they also figured out that by July of 1961, about 1,000 a day were coming. In a month, that rose to 2,500 a day. So it was 1,000 a day in July of 1961. In August of 1961, the number rose from 1,000 a day to 2,500 a day. That people were leaving East Berlin or East Germany and coming to the western part to get away from communism. Well, what's that doing to the economy of East Germany? Horrible, because the labor force is all leaving. So what did the East German police begin to do on August 13th of 1961? Not quite the wall, but you're there. They started to construct obstacles first to seal off the streets and crossings into West Berlin, which they were later replaced with a wall. But because of the infiltration of so many people that did not want to be part of communism into the western part of Germany, on July 13th of 1961 is when East German police were ordered to begin to construct obstacles to keep people out of West Berlin. Now these